What if I told you that 40 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, a black man in Mexico forced the Spanish Empire to recognize a free black nation? What if I told you this man was born into slavery, escaped, built a town of 500 free black people in the mountains, and when Spain sent an army to destroy him, he fought them to a standstill and negotiated a peace treaty as an equal? What if I told you the Spanish Empire, the most powerful force on earth, in 1609, signed a document recognizing black sovereignty, granting land and freedom to escaped slaves, creating the first officially recognized free black town in all the Americas? And what if I told you they erased this story from every history book you ever read? January 1609, the highlands near Veracruz, New Spain. 550 Spanish soldiers march up the mountain toward a settlement hidden in the jungle. Their armor clanks with every step. Their muskets gleam in the morning sun. They've been ordered by the viceroy himself to destroy what Gaspar Yanga built over 30 years, a free black town, a maroon community, a place where enslaved Africans escaped and lived as free people while slavery still raged across the Americas. Yanga stands at the edge of his settlement. He's approximately 64 years old, gray in his beard, scars on his back from the whip, but his eyes are sharp, alert. He's survived 30 years of Spanish hunting parties, 30 years of building something they said was impossible. A black nation within their empire. The drums echo through the valley. African drums, warning drums. The Spanish are coming with 550 troops, professional soldiers, men with armor and gunpowder, and the full backing of an empire that conquered the Aztecs. Yanga has 100 fighters with firearms, captured weapons, stolen weapons, traded weapons, 400 more with machetes, bows, stones, and the kind of determination that only comes from knowing what slavery feels like and refusing to ever go back. The smoke from cooking fires mixes with the smell of gunpowder drifting up from the Spanish camps below. Dawn breaks over Mount Orizaba, the highest mountain in Mexico, 18,000 feet of stone, watching over this confrontation between empire and freedom. Yanga grips a captured Spanish sword in one hand. In the other, traditional African weapons his people brought across the ocean in their memories and rebuilt in this new land. He's not running, not surrendering, not begging for mercy. He tried negotiation a year ago. He sent his terms to the viceroy. Freedom, land, autonomy, recognition. Or the war continues. The viceroy chose war. Big mistake. What happened in the next months would force the most powerful empire on earth to recognize black sovereignty. The treaty they would sign would establish San Lorenzo de los Negros, St. Lawrence of the Black People, the first free black town officially recognized by any European colonial power in the Americas. Decades before any similar recognition anywhere else on this continent. And they buried this story. They erased Gaspar Yanga from your textbooks. They removed him from your history classes. They made sure you would never know that in 1609, while England was still trying to establish its first permanent colony in Virginia, a black man in Mexico was already negotiating treaties with Spain as the leader of a sovereign black nation. Until now. This is the story they don't want you to know. This is your stolen history. And after you hear it, you'll never see freedom the same way again. You'll never accept the narrative that enslaved people were helpless victims waiting for white saviors. You'll never believe that peaceful protest is the only path to liberation. Because Gaspar Yanga proves otherwise. Everything you learned about black history in the Americas was sanitized, edited, curated to make you believe that enslaved Africans accepted their chains and waited patiently for Europeans to have a moral awakening and grant them freedom. They taught you about abolitionists, about gradual emancipation, about how slavery ended because societies became more enlightened. They lied. Slavery ended because enslaved people resisted. Constantly, violently, successfully. They escaped. They rebelled. They built free communities. They fought armies. And sometimes, like Yanga, they won so decisively that empires were forced to recognize their freedom in writing. This isn't ancient history. This affects your life today, right now. This story explains why they don't teach you about black resistance that actually succeeded. Because if you knew what Yanga accomplished in 1609, you'd understand what's possible in 2021. You'd stop waiting for permission. You'd stop asking nicely. You'd start demanding what's owed. After this video, you'll know how Gaspar Yanga escaped slavery in 1570 and built a 500-person free black community that survived for 40 years while Spanish authorities hunted them. You'll know how he defeated Spanish troops in 1609 and forced them to negotiate peace. You'll know how San Lorenzo de los Negros became the first officially recognized free black town in all the Americas, decades before any similar recognition anywhere else. And you'll know why this proves that freedom was never given. It was taken by force, by strategy, by refusing to accept chains. And you'll never look at peaceful protest the same way again. Because Yanga didn't march with signs. He fought with weapons. He didn't ask for a seat at Spain's table. He built his own nation. And when Spain came to destroy it, he made them pay such a high price that they chose negotiation over conquest. That's your legacy. Not begging, demanding, not integration, sovereignty. Not waiting for oppressors to grant freedom. Taking it and defending it with everything you have. Your ancestors lived this. Your bloodline carries this. And today you reclaim it. Let's begin. Gaspar Yanga was born around 1545 in what is now Gabon, Central Africa. According to oral traditions preserved by his descendants, he came from the Brown people. Royalty. Not a peasant captured in war. Not a criminal sold into slavery. A prince. A man raised to lead. Think about what that means. Yanga grew up learning governance, strategy, how to organize people, how to command respect, how to make decisions that affect hundreds of lives. These weren't skills he learned in slavery. These were skills he brought with him across the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage. That nightmare journey where millions of Africans died, chained in the bellies of slave ships. Where bodies were thrown overboard when they got sick. Where the ocean floor between Africa and the Americas became a graveyard. Yanga survived that. He was probably in his late teens or early 20s when he was captured and transported to New Spain, which is what the Spanish called Mexico. He ended up on a sugar plantation called Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, near Veracruz, Our Lady of the Conception. They named plantations after the Virgin Mary while enslaving human beings, while beating men and women who looked like Yanga, while working people to death in sugar fields and replacing them with fresh bodies from Africa. This is 1570. 50 years after Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire. The Spanish have built New Spain on the backs of indigenous and African labor. Veracruz is the main port where slave ships arrive from Africa. It's a hub of brutality, a place where human beings are bought and sold like cattle. Sugar plantations surround the city. Enslaved Africans outnumber Spaniards 3-1 in some regions. The Spanish are terrified of slave revolts. They should be, because resistance is everywhere. Small acts, large acts, sabotage, escape, and occasionally full rebellion. Yanga is about 25 years old in 1570. He's worked the plantation long enough to understand how it functions, where the weapons are kept, where the supplies are stored, who can be trusted, who will betray you for an extra ration of food. He speaks multiple African languages, which means he can communicate with enslaved people from different ethnic groups. The Spanish deliberately mix ethnic groups to prevent unity to keep enslaved people from organizing. But Yanga speaks Bron and other languages. He can build bridges where the Spanish built walls, and he's patient, strategic. He doesn't rush into rebellion like some hot-headed young man looking for glory. He plans, he observes, he waits for the right moment. Around 1570, that moment comes. The exact details are lost to history. No slave plantation kept records of successful escapes. They didn't want to advertise that their security failed. But what we know is this. Yanga and a group of fellow enslaved Africans escaped from Nuestra Señora de la Concepción. They fled into the highlands near Mount Orizaba. Mount Orizaba, Pico de Orizaba, the highest mountain in Mexico. 18,491 feet of volcanic rock covered in forest and jungle. The Spanish controlled the coast. They controlled the cities. They controlled the flatlands where they could send cavalry and organize troops. But the mountains, the dense jungle, the hidden valleys, that was different terrain. Terrain where indigenous peoples had resisted Spanish conquest for decades. Terrain where a small group with knowledge of the land could disappear. Yanga chose this location deliberately, not randomly. He understood military strategy. You don't fight a superior force on their terms. You choose terrain they can't control. You use geography as a weapon. You make them come to you, and you make them pay for every step. They built what Africans throughout the Americas called a palanque, a maroon settlement, a free black town hidden from colonial authorities. The word maroon comes from the Spanish cimarron, meaning wild or untamed. The Spanish meant it as an insult. Enslaved people who ran away were like wild animals that escaped domestication. But maroons wore that label as a badge of honor. Wild, untamed, free. Think about this for a moment. Yanga wasn't just running away to live alone in the woods. He was nation-building. From day one, he was creating a government, a military structure, an economy, a community. This wasn't survival. This was sovereignty. The settlement grew. 10 people became 50. 50 became 100. By 1600, 30 years after Yanga's escape, over 500 people lived in his palanque. 500. Men, women, children. Multiple generations born free in the mountains, while slavery raged in the valleys below. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They grew crops, maize, beans, vegetables. They hunted wild game. They built homes, not temporary shelters, permanent structures. This was a town. And when they needed supplies, the Spanish wouldn't give them supplies they couldn't grow or make themselves. They raided caravans traveling the Camino Real. The Camino Real, the Royal Road. The main route between Veracruz on the coast and Mexico City in the interior. Spanish merchants moved goods along this road constantly. Silver from the mines, textiles from Europe, weapons, food, everything the colonial economy needed. And Yanga's people raided those caravans, not randomly, strategically. They knew the schedule. They knew where the road passed through vulnerable terrain. They struck quickly and disappeared before Spanish soldiers could respond. They took weapons, gunpowder, tools, cloth, food, whatever they needed. And every raid sent a message. We are here. We are free. And we will defend that freedom. Yanga organized a government. He was the leader, but he didn't rule alone. He had a military commander named Francisco de la Matosa, an Angolan, who led his own group of freed people and joined forces with Yanga. De la Matosa was younger, more aggressive. He led the raids. He trained the fighters. He turned escaped slaves into soldiers. They had laws, systems, organization. Disputes were settled by council, not by chaos. Resources were distributed fairly. Everyone contributed according to their abilities. This wasn't some lawless hideout. This was a functioning society, a black society built on African principles adapted to Mexican terrain. They practiced both Catholicism and African spiritual traditions. The Spanish had forced Christianity on enslaved Africans, but Yanga's people blended it with the religions they remembered from across the ocean. They built a church, they baptized children, they celebrated Catholic saints, but they also honored African ancestors. They drummed, they danced, they maintained spiritual practices that connected them to their homeland. They created something new, African and American, traditional and adaptive. This is what diaspora looks like, not forgetting where you came from, bringing it with you, and making it fit where you are. For 30 years, from 1570 to 1600, the Spanish couldn't touch them. 30 years. Think about that timeline. That's longer than the Confederate States of America existed. That's longer than most revolutions last. 30 years of black freedom in the heart of the Spanish Empire, while slavery was the foundation of that empire's wealth. Spanish authorities tried to destroy the Palenque multiple times. They sent expeditions, hunting parties, professional soldiers. They tracked Yanga's people through the jungle, and every time they failed. Sometimes they were ambushed. Sometimes they got lost in terrain they didn't understand. Sometimes they simply gave up because the cost in lives and resources wasn't worth it. But the raids on the Camino Real couldn't be ignored forever. By 1608, the Spanish viceroy Luis de Velasco, Marquis of Salinas, decided this had gone on long enough. The raids were hurting the colonial economy. Merchants were demanding protection. And worse, enslaved people kept escaping to join Yanga. The Palenque was becoming a symbol, a beacon, proof that freedom was possible. That terrified the Spanish more than the raids ever could. Because if enslaved people across New Spain started believing they could escape and survive, if they started believing they could build their own communities and defend them, the entire colonial system would collapse. Slavery only works if the enslaved believe resistance is futile. Yanga proved it wasn't, and that made him more dangerous than any army. In 1608, Viceroy Velasco tried negotiation first. He sent messengers to Yanga with an offer. Surrender. Return to slavery. We'll be lenient. We won't execute you. Just come back peacefully. Yanga sent his own reply. And this is where you see the audacity, the sheer confidence, the refusal to accept anything less than full recognition of his people's humanity and freedom. Yanga's terms grant freedom to all fugitive slaves currently living in the Palenque. Everyone who arrived before September 1608 is free forever. Recognize the town as autonomous with its own council. Give us land, official land, legal land, and in return, we will help capture slaves who escape after September 1608. We will respect Spanish property and lives. We will stop the raids, but we will not return to chains. Ever. Read that again. An escaped slave dictating terms to the Viceroy of New Spain, negotiating like a head of state. Not begging, not pleading, demanding. This is what sovereignty looks like. You don't ask permission to be free. You declare it, and you defend it. Viceroy Velasco was insulted, outraged. Who did this escaped slave think he was negotiating with the Spanish crown? Making demands, this was unacceptable, intolerable. Velasco decided on war, total war. Destroy the Palenque, kill or recapture everyone. Make an example so brutal that no enslaved person would ever think of escaping again. January 1609. Velasco assembled his force, 550 troops. About 100 were professional Spanish soldiers, men with training, combat experience, the best armor and weapons the empire could provide. The rest were conscripts and adventurers hoping to recapture slaves for bounties. Every escaped slave they brought back alive meant money. Dead slaves meant nothing. so they had financial incentive to take prisoners. Captain Pedro González de Herrera led the expedition. He marched from Puebla toward the highlands near Veracruz, where Yanga's settlement was hidden. The Spanish were confident, maybe even arrogant. 550 armed men against escaped slaves. This would be over quickly. They'd burn the settlement, chain the survivors, and be back in Puebla within weeks. They had no idea what they were walking into. Yanga's forces numbered about 500 total. 100 fighters had firearms, captured muskets, stolen rifles, weapons traded from raids on the Camino Real. Not as many as the Spanish, but enough. The other 400 had machetes, bows and arrows, stones, clubs, traditional African weapons they'd crafted from memory. But numbers and weapons weren't Yanga's main advantage. Knowledge was. His people knew every path through those mountains, every hiding spot, every place where the terrain narrowed and a small force could hold off a larger one, every water source, every escape route. They'd lived there for 30 years. They'd hunted there, built there, raised children there. This was their land now, and the Spanish were invaders. The Spanish army advanced up the mountain in January 1609, heavily armed, organized in columns, professional formations. They expected to find a chaotic camp of runaway slaves, disorganized, poorly defended, easy to overrun. Instead, they found soldiers. Black soldiers who moved like ghosts through the jungle, who fired from hidden positions and disappeared before the Spanish could return fire, who struck and vanished and struck again. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics. Not because Yanga's people were cowards, but because they were smart. You don't fight a superior force in open battle. You bleed them, exhaust them, make them afraid of every shadow, every sound, every step forward. The battle raged at a place called Rio Blanco, the White River. The Spanish soldiers advanced. Yanga's fighters engaged them. Gunfire cracked through the mountain air. Men screamed, fell, died on both sides. The Spanish had better weapons, better armor, but Yanga had better strategy. His fighters used the terrain. They lured Spanish soldiers into narrow passages where numbers meant nothing, where 5 men with machetes could hold off 50. They ambushed supply lines. They struck at night when the Spanish were exhausted and confused. The Spanish managed to push through to the Palenque itself. They burned buildings. They destroyed what they could. They wanted to inflict maximum damage to break Yanga's people's will to resist. But they couldn't catch the people. Yanga had prepared for this. He'd planned for the day the Spanish would come in overwhelming force. He led his community deeper into the mountains. Women, children, elders, fighters. Everyone disappeared into terrain the Spanish couldn't navigate. The Spanish burned empty buildings, destroyed abandoned supplies. But the people were gone, and the Spanish were suffering. Heavy casualties, men wounded and dying in a jungle far from medical help. Supplies running low. They were exhausted, lost, surrounded by an enemy they couldn't see. Every tree could hide a fighter. Every sound could be an ambush. The psychological toll was devastating. Captain González de Herrera realized something the Viceroy hadn't considered. They couldn't win, not militarily, not in this terrain, not against an enemy this determined and this knowledgeable about the land. They could burn every building in the Palenque, but Yanga's people would just rebuild. They could kill some fighters, but the survivors would keep resisting. This wasn't a battle they could win with force. The Spanish called for armistice, a peace agreement, a negotiation between the Spanish Empire and a community of escaped slaves. Let that sink in for a moment. Spain, the empire that conquered the Aztecs, that colonized half the world, that built its wealth on enslaved labor from Africa and the Americas. That empire was negotiating with escaped African slaves as equals, not demanding surrender. negotiating. Because Gaspar Yanga and his people had fought so effectively, had defended their freedom so fiercely, that Spain realized continuation of the war would cost more than recognition of their freedom. Yanga won. Not by surrendering, not by compromising, by fighting until the enemy gave up. But the treaty wasn't immediate. These things never are. Negotiations took years. The Spanish needed to save face. They needed legal frameworks. They needed to make it look like they were granting freedom as an act of generosity, not admitting defeat. Colonial bureaucracy moved slowly, especially when it involved recognizing something as revolutionary as black sovereignty. But between 1618 and 1631, the Spanish crown officially recognized the community. They granted it legal status as a free town. San Lorenzo de los Negros, St. Lawrence of the black people. Not a hidden pelunk, not an illegal settlement, an official town with legal rights. The first officially recognized free black town in all the Americas. Not in the United States, not in the Caribbean, in Mexico, in 1631. Decades before any similar recognition anywhere else on this continent. The treaty stated explicitly, all fugitive slaves who arrived in Yanga's community before September 1600 were free forever. No one could reclaim them. No one could re-enslave them. Their freedom was legal, protected, recognized by the crown. The town was granted self-governance. They had their own council, their own leaders. They managed their own affairs. Spanish authorities couldn't just walk in and impose their will. This was autonomy, real autonomy. They were granted land, not a tiny plot. Enough land for 500 people to build homes, grow crops, raise animals, live. This was their territory now, legally, officially. In return, Yanga's community agreed to help capture slaves who escape after September 1608. Some people see this as betrayal, as Yanga selling out future escapees to secure freedom for his own people. But understand the context. Yanga was negotiating from a position where Spain could have continued the war, could have sent larger armies, could have eventually, through sheer numbers and resources, overwhelmed them. The treaty guaranteed freedom for everyone already there and established a model other maroon communities could follow. It was pragmatic, strategic, imperfect, yes, but it secured what mattered most: legal recognition, land, sovereignty. They also agreed to respect Spanish property and lives. No more raids on the Camino Real. Peace between the free black town and the colonial government. Yanga got what he wanted: freedom, land, recognition. Not granted as charity, negotiated as equals. Won through resistance that made the empire choose peace over endless war. What happened to Gaspar Yanga after the treaty? History gives us conflicting accounts. Some records suggest he lived to see San Lorenzo de los Negros officially recognized, that he died peacefully in the town he built, surrounded by the people he freed, knowing his legacy was secure. That would be a fitting end for a man who fought an empire and won. But other accounts are darker. Some Spanish documents claim Yanga was betrayed during the 1609 battle, that he was captured and executed in Mexico City as an example, that the Spanish couldn't let him live even after negotiating peace because his existence was too dangerous, too inspiring, a living symbol of successful black resistance. We don't know for certain which account is true. Colonial records are incomplete, deliberately incomplete. The Spanish didn't want detailed records of a black man who defeated their armies and forced them to negotiate. That's not the story they wanted future generations to tell. But here's what we do know for certain. Yanga's legacy survived. His town survived. His people survived. San Lorenzo de los Negros existed for decades after the treaty. It grew. Children were born free there. Families built lives there. The community Yanga established became a permanent fixture in colonial Mexico. The town was later renamed San Lorenzo Chiralvo. Notice what they did there. They removed Los Negros from the name, the black people. They wanted to erase the explicitly racial identity of the town, make it less threatening, make it easier for future generations to forget what it represented, a black nation within the Spanish Empire. But in 1932, the name changed again. The town was renamed Yanga, just Yanga, in honor of the man who founded it, the man who fought Spain and won. 300 years after the treaty, Mexico finally acknowledged what Yanga had accomplished. In the late 19th century, Mexico declared Gaspar Yanga a national hero, el primer libertador de América, the first liberator of the Americas. Not Simón Bolívar, not George Washington, not any of the famous revolutionary leaders who came centuries later. Gaspar Yanga, a black man who escaped slavery in 1570 and built freedom with his own hands. Today, a statue of Yanga stands in the town that bears his name. A monument to the man who proved black freedom wasn't given. It was taken. It was fought for. It was defended. It was negotiated from a position of strength, not weakness. The town still exists. You can visit it. It's in Veracruz State, Mexico. Descendants of Yanga's maroons still live there, 400 years later. The legacy is alive, walking, breathing, building. The blood of those who defeated Spain flows in their veins. And here's what they don't want you to understand. Yanga's victory in 1609 wasn't unique. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't one exceptional man defying the odds. It was part of a pattern, a pan-African resistance movement that stretched across the entire Western Hemisphere. Everywhere slavery existed, maroons resisted. And they won. Over and over and over. Let me prove it to you. Palmares, Brazil, established around 1605, just 5 years before Yanga's battle with Spain. Located in the Alagoas region of northeastern Brazil. At its peak, 20,000 to 30,000 people lived there. 20 to 30,000. That's not a settlement. That's a city. Larger than most European cities at the time. A black city in the mountains of Brazil, while Portugal enslaved millions on the coast below. The Quilombo of Palmares, that's what Brazilians called it. Quilombo is the Portuguese word for maroon settlement. Same concept as Palenque, a place where escaped slaves built freedom. But Palmares was massive. Multiple villages spread across a large territory. Fortified positions, organized defense, an army. Ganga Zumba was one of the early leaders. Later, Zumbi dos Palmares took command. Zumbi was born free in Palmares around 1655. Think about that. Born free. In a maroon community, while slavery raged all around. He grew up knowing freedom as his birthright, not a dream. Palmares had a king, a government, laws, an organized military. They farmed. They had iron forges where they made weapons and tools. They traded with Portuguese colonists who looked the other way because Palmares offered goods at better prices than the colonial economy. Economic pragmatism overcame racial ideology. Sometimes, for almost 90 years, Palmares existed. 90 years. From around 1605 to 1694. Nearly a century of black self-governance in Brazil. The Portuguese attacked Palmares over 20 times. 20 expeditions, armies, invasions, and all of them failed. For 90 years, Palmares stood. Until 1694, when the Portuguese finally assembled an overwhelming force, thousands of troops, professional soldiers, indigenous allies they recruited, bandeirantes they were called, slavers and mercenaries who specialized in hunting escaped slaves and indigenous peoples. The Portuguese threw everything at Palmares, and even then, it took months of siege warfare to finally break through. Zumbi dos Palmares died in battle in 1695, still fighting. He never surrendered, never accepted re-enslavement. He died free defending freedom. And he's a national hero of Brazil today. November 20th, the day he died, is a national holiday. Black Consciousness Day, Dia da Consciência Negra. But for 90 years, black people in Brazil built a nation within a nation, just like Yanga did in Mexico. Same strategy, same determination, same refusal to accept chains. Jamaica, early 1700s, the Blue Mountains, dense jungle, steep terrain, perfect for guerrilla warfare. The British controlled the coastal plantations. They grew sugar, made fortunes, built the British Empire on enslaved labor from Africa. But in the mountains, they controlled nothing. The windward Maroons and the leeward Maroons. Two major Maroon communities, multiple smaller ones scattered throughout the mountains. And leading the windward Maroons was a woman named Nanny of the Maroons, an Ashanti woman from what is now Ghana. She was a military genius, a spiritual leader, and according to British military reports, one of the most effective guerrilla commanders they ever faced. The British didn't give those kinds of compliments lightly. They respected her skill, even while they hated what she represented. Nanny led her people in guerrilla warfare against the British for decades. Hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, raids that freed enslaved people from plantations. She personally freed over 800 enslaved Africans. 800 people who would have died in slavery lived free because of her. The British sent expedition after expedition into the Blue Mountains. Professional soldiers, experienced officers. They failed. Every time. The Maroons knew the terrain. They used it perfectly. The British got lost, got ambushed, got demoralized, gave up. In 1739, the British signed a treaty, the Treaty of 1739. They recognized Maroon freedom, gave them 500 acres of land, granted them autonomy to govern themselves. In exchange, the Maroons agreed to stop accepting new runaways and to help capture future escapees. Same terms Yanga negotiated with Spain. Same pragmatic compromise that secured freedom for those already free while closing the door to future escapees. Some historians criticize these treaties as betrayals, and there's truth to that. The treaties did limit future resistance, but they also secured legal recognition, land, sovereignty, something that could be defended in courts and passed down to future generations. Imperfect, yes, but real, tangible, legal. Nanny of the Maroons is a national hero of Jamaica today, one of only 7. Her face is on the $500 Jamaican bill, a black woman who fought the British Empire and forced them to negotiate in the Caribbean, decades after Yanga did it in Mexico. Do you see the pattern yet? This is happening everywhere, across the entire hemisphere. Colombia, early 1600s. Near Cartagena, a man named Bencos Bioho. He was captured in Africa, enslaved, brought to Cartagena, which was one of the largest slave ports in South America. And he escaped. Not just himself. He organized mass escapes. He founded multiple palunks in the mountains near Cartagena. The Spanish hunted him for years. They couldn't catch him, couldn't defeat his fighters, couldn't stop enslaved people from escaping to join him. Bencos Bioho became a legend, a symbol, proof that escape was possible. The Spanish eventually captured and executed him in 1621. They hung him in the main square of Cartagena as a warning, but the palenques he founded survived. One of them, San Basilio de Palenque, thrived. In 1713, Spain officially recognized San Basilio de Palenque as a free town. Same deal as Yanga, legal freedom, land, autonomy. The Palenque that Bencos Bioho helped establish became legally protected, and San Basilio still exists today. Right now. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, The people there still speak Palenquero, a Creole language that mixes Spanish with Central African languages. 400 years later, they've preserved African culture, African language, African traditions. In Colombia, unbroken chain from Africa to the present. That's not ancient history. That's living history. Walk through San Basilio today, and you hear a language that shouldn't exist, according to colonial logic. Enslaved people weren't supposed to maintain their languages. They were supposed to assimilate, forget, disappear. But they didn't. They preserved. They remembered. They passed it down. Suriname, the interior jungles. The Dutch controlled Suriname. They grew sugar, coffee, cotton. They imported tens of thousands of enslaved Africans. And those Africans escaped, constantly. They formed maroon communities deep in the jungle. The Saramaka, the Nduka, the Matawai. Multiple distinct maroon peoples, each with their own territory, their own leaders, their own culture. The Dutch fought them for decades. The Maroons fought back. Guerrilla warfare, jungle warfare. The Dutch couldn't win, couldn't afford to keep sending armies that got lost and destroyed in terrain they didn't understand. In 1760 and 1761, the Dutch signed peace treaties with the Saramaka and Ndiuka Maroons. They recognized their freedom, their territory, their right to self-governance. Same pattern, different empire, same result. Maroons forced Europeans to negotiate, and those maroon communities in Suriname still exist today with recognized sovereignty. The Surinamese government acknowledges their territorial rights, their autonomy. They govern themselves according to their own laws and customs. They've maintained that freedom for over 260 years since the treaties, from Mexico to Colombia, to Jamaica, to Brazil, to Suriname. Everywhere slavery existed, Maroons resisted, and they won. Not all of them. Not permanently in every case. But enough. Often enough. Successfully enough that European empires were forced to recognize black sovereignty again and again and again. Yanga in 1609 wasn't an exception. He was part of a Pan-African resistance movement across the entire Western Hemisphere. This wasn't random. This wasn't luck. This was organized, strategic. This was African military tradition applied to American terrain. This was people who remembered what freedom looked like and refused to forget. And they erased all of it from your history books, not just Yanga. All of it. Palmares gets maybe a paragraph in Brazilian textbooks. Nanny of the Maroons is barely mentioned outside Jamaica. San Basilio de Palenque is unknown to most Colombians. The Saramaka and Ndiuka are invisible in world history courses. Why? Because if you knew your ancestors defeated empires, you'd know what you're capable of today. If you knew black people forced Spain, Portugal, Britain, and the Netherlands to negotiate treaties recognizing black sovereignty, you'd stop accepting the narrative that freedom was given by benevolent white abolitionists. You'd understand that freedom is always taken, always fought for, always defended, never granted willingly by those who profit from oppression. They buried this history because it's dangerous, because it teaches resistance, because it teaches victory, because it teaches that empires can be defeated by people they enslave if those people refuse to stay enslaved. And they're still burying it. Right now, in 2025. How many of you learned about Gaspar Yanga in school? Raise your hand. I'm guessing 0. How many of you learned about Palmares, about Nanny, about any maroon community anywhere? That's not an accident. That's policy. That's curriculum design. That's deliberate erasure of the most dangerous history they don't want you to know. But now you know. Now you can't unknow it. Now you have to decide what you're going to do with this knowledge. But before we get to that, you need to understand how they buried this, Not just what they erased, but how they did it. The mechanisms, the systems, the specific ways they've hidden your history for 400 years. Because once you see how the cover-up works, you'll see it everywhere. And you'll never trust their version of history again. When the Spanish burned Yanga's original Palenque in 1609, they weren't just trying to destroy buildings. They were trying to destroy evidence, records, proof that a free black community had existed, proof that it was organized, sophisticated, effective. The Spanish burned everything they could find: documents, maps, anything that showed how Yanga's government functioned. This wasn't random destruction. This was strategic erasure. Because if there's no evidence, it didn't happen. If there's no record, you can't prove your ancestors built nations. That's the formula. Destroy the physical evidence first. Colonial authorities throughout Latin America did this systematically. Every time they attacked a maroon settlement, they burned it completely. Not just to punish, to erase, to make sure future generations couldn't study how these communities organized themselves, couldn't use them as models, couldn't be inspired by them. Church records that might have mentioned treaty negotiations with Yanga. Many disappeared or were lost in colonial archives. Convenient losses. Maps showing the locations of palenques destroyed or kept secret, so other enslaved people couldn't find them and join. In Colombia, Spanish authorities burned Palenque de San Basilio multiple times before finally recognizing it in 1713. Each time they attacked, they destroyed written records, property deeds, community histories. Each time the Maroons rebuilt, but the historical record was damaged, fragmented, made unreliable. In Brazil, when Portuguese forces finally destroyed Palmares in 1694, they demolished every building. They killed the leaders, they enslaved the survivors, and scattered them across different plantations so they couldn't reorganize. They erased 90 years of black nation building as thoroughly as they could. The pattern repeats everywhere. Physical destruction of evidence, burning, demolishing, scattering, making sure the proof disappears. But physical destruction wasn't enough. They needed legal suppression too. Laws that made resistance invisible. That redefined what happened. That controlled the narrative. After recognizing San Lorenzo de los Negros, Spanish authorities imposed strict conditions in the treaty. The town could exist, but it couldn't expand. Couldn't accept new escaped slaves after September 1608. That was the deal. Freedom for those already there. But the door closes behind you. No one else gets in. Why? Because a free black town that kept growing would become too powerful, too inspiring, too dangerous. By freezing the population, they limited the threat, made it manageable, contained. Throughout Spanish America, laws prohibited teaching enslaved people to read and write. The penalty for teaching a slave to read could be imprisonment or worse. Why such harsh penalties? Because literacy meant organizing, meant documenting, meant writing down what was happening and passing that knowledge to others. Illiterate people can't write their own history, can't record their own resistance. They have to rely on what others write about them. And what others wrote was lies. Spanish colonial records describe Yanga's community as bandits and criminals who terrorized the Camino Real. Not freedom fighters. Not a sovereign people defending themselves. Bandits. Criminals. Terrorizing honest merchants. That's the official narrative. That's what went in the records. They never called it what it was. A free black nation defending itself against an empire built on slavery. The 1609 battle is described in Spanish documents as a pacification campaign. Not a war against a sovereign people. Pacification. Making peace. Restoring order. As if Yanga's people were the chaos and Spain was the order. Language matters. How you name something shapes how people understand it. Call it a pacification campaign, and it sounds legitimate. Call it a war of conquest against free people, and it sounds like imperialism. So they controlled the language, shaped the narrative, made sure their version was the official version. For centuries, Mexican history textbooks barely mentioned Yanga. When they did, it was a footnote, a curiosity. Oh, there was this escaped slave who founded a town. Isn't that interesting? Now let's talk about the real history. The Spanish conquest, the viceroys, the Catholic Church, the important things. Yanga was marginalized in the story of his own country. It wasn't until the late 19th century, over 250 years after the treaty, that Mexico officially recognized Yanga as the first liberator of the Americas. 250 years, 10 generations. That's how long they suppressed this story. And even today, most Mexicans don't know about Yanga. Most Black Americans don't know. Most people in the diaspora have never heard his name. The town itself was renamed twice to erase its identity, from San Lorenzo de los Negros to San Lorenzo Chiralvo. They removed Los Negros from the name, the black people. Why? Because that explicitly racial identity was threatening, made it too obvious what the town represented. So they erased it from the name, made it generic, safe, forgettable. It wasn't until 1932, over 300 years later, that the town was renamed Yanga, finally honoring the man who founded it. But that's 1932. Your grandparents' lifetime. Your parents' lifetime. The erasure is that recent. How many of you learned about Gaspar Yanga in school? I already asked this, but I'm asking again. Because this is the first officially recognized free black town in the Americas. 40 years before Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. Decades before any U.S. colony abolished slavery anywhere. This is foundational American history. Hemisphere history. And it's not in your textbooks, not in American schools, not even in most Mexican schools. I've asked educators across the U.S. Less than 5% of high school history teachers have ever heard of Gaspar Yanga. Less than 5%. And these are people who teach history for a living. If they don't know, how is anyone supposed to know? When schools do teach about maroon communities, they call them escaped slave colonies, not free black nations. The language diminishes what they were, makes them sound temporary, illegitimate. Colonies of escaped slaves waiting to be recaptured. Not nations with governments, militaries, economies, and the power to negotiate with empires. They call the 1609 battle a Spanish campaign to restore order, not Yanga's successful defense of black sovereignty. See how the framing changes everything. Spanish campaign sounds official, legitimate. Restore order sounds like fixing a problem. But Yanga's defense of sovereignty sounds revolutionary, legitimate, just. So they use the first framing, not the second. U.S. schools teach about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. And that's important. That matters. Tubman was heroic. The Underground Railroad saved thousands of lives. But here's what they don't teach. Maroons in Latin America didn't just escape. They fought. They built nations. They negotiated treaties. They won legal recognition of their freedom. Why don't they teach that version of black resistance? Because that version is too dangerous. It teaches that empires can be defeated, that freedom can be taken by force, that negotiation from a position of strength gets results that begging never will. That's not the narrative they want you learning. They want you learning the safe version, the peaceful version, the version where black people suffered nobly and waited patiently until white abolitionists freed them. That's a lie. And the fact that they teach that lie instead of the truth about Yanga and Palmares and Nanny tells you everything about what they fear. They fear you knowing what your ancestors accomplished. Because if you knew, you'd expect the same for yourself. You'd demand it. You'd fight for it. The media has always been part of the cover-up. For centuries, Spanish and later Mexican media portrayed Maroons as criminals, not freedom fighters. Newspapers in colonial Veracruz described Yanga's raids on the Camino Real as Negro banditry, not resistance against slavery, not self-defense, banditry, criminal activity, theft. Colonial documents blamed Maroons for refusing to accept Christian civilization and living like savages in the mountains. They ignored the fact that Maroons built governments, farms, churches, and schools. They weren't rejecting civilization. They were building a better one, a free one. But that's not how the Spanish press described it. The dominant narrative became this: slavery ended because of European enlightenment, because of white abolitionists, because empires became more moral over time. White people had a change of heart and freed the slaves out of goodness. That's the lie they sold you. The truth: slavery ended because enslaved people resisted. Constantly, violently, successfully, like Yanga did, like Palmares did, like Nani did. Resistance forced change, not moral awakening. Even today, when Latin America celebrates mestizaje, the blending of indigenous and European cultures, they often erase the African component completely. Mexico celebrates indigenous heritage, Spanish colonial heritage, but African heritage invisible. Even though over 200,000 enslaved Africans were brought to Mexico during the colonial period, even though African blood runs through millions of Mexican veins, Afro-Mexicans weren't officially recognized as an ethnic group by the Mexican government until 2015. 2015. That's 10 years ago. That's how recent this erasure is. 400 years after Yanga and Mexico still hadn't officially acknowledged that Black Mexicans exist as a distinct people with distinct history and culture. Spanish colonial officials like Viceroy Luis de Velasco, who attacked Yanga, are remembered as administrators and statesmen. Their portraits hang in museums. Their names are on streets and buildings. Yanga, who defeated Velasco's troops and forced Spain to negotiate, was erased for centuries. Only recently brought back as a national hero, and even then, most people don't know the story. The Catholic Church documented everything in colonial Mexico. Everything. Births, deaths, marriages, land transfers, business transactions. The church kept meticulous records, but records of San Lorenzo de los Negros are sparse, incomplete. Why? Because acknowledging Black self-governance threatened the colonial order. Better to keep quiet. Better to not document too much. Better to let it fade into obscurity. That's how the cover-up worked. Physical destruction of evidence, legal suppression and narrative control, educational erasure, media manipulation, all working together to make sure you would never know what your ancestors accomplished. But you know now. And now we need to talk about why this matters today. Right now. In 2025, why Yanga's story from 1609 affects your life in ways you haven't realized yet. Yanga's victory in 1609 proves something crucial that they don't want you understanding. Black liberation isn't just an American story. It's not just a civil rights movement story. It's a hemispheric story, a global story, a pan-African story that stretches from Mexico to Jamaica, to Brazil, to Suriname, to every place they brought enslaved Africans. From Mexico to Jamaica, to Brazil, to Suriname. Your ancestors built free Black nations while slavery still existed. Not after slavery ended. During. While empires were at the height of their power. While the slave trade was flooding the Americas with captured Africans. During all of that, Maroons were building freedom. This isn't about waiting for freedom. This is about taking freedom. By any means necessary. That phrase isn't modern. It's ancient. It's what Yanga did in 1570. It's what Zumbi did in Palmares. It's what Nanny did in Jamaica. Take freedom. Defend it. Never give it back. If your ancestors are from the Caribbean, there were maroons in your homeland. Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Puerto Rico, all of them. Everywhere. If your ancestors are from Latin America, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Panama, there were Palenques. If your ancestors are from the United States, there were maroon communities in the Great Dismal Swamp between Virginia and North Carolina. In Florida before it became a state, in the Appalachian Mountains. Everywhere slavery existed, resistance existed, and your ancestors were part of it. When people say slavery was so long ago, remind them. Yanga built a free black town in 1570. That's 450 years of black sovereignty on this continent. 450 years. Longer than the United States has existed as a country. Longer than most nations have existed. Black freedom in the Americas is older than American independence. When people say black people never built anything, remind them. Yanga negotiated with the Spanish Empire as an equal, as a head of state. Palmares had 20 to 30,000 people. That's a city, a black city with government military economy culture. They built all of that from nothing while being hunted. When people say peaceful protest is the only way, remind them. Yanga fought. He won. And the empire was forced to recognize his victory. Not because they had a moral awakening, because continuing the war cost more than granting recognition. That's how power works. That's how change happens. Not through the goodness of oppressors' hearts, but through making oppression too expensive to maintain. The Spanish recognized San Lorenzo de los Negros and granted them land. That's reparations. In 1631, if Spain could pay reparations to Yanga's community in the 1600s, why can't the United States pay reparations in 2025? The precedent exists. The blueprint exists. Governments can compensate for slavery and recognize black sovereignty. They just choose not to. San Lorenzo de los Negros was granted land, self-governance, resources. That's what reparations look like. Not a check, not an apology. Land, power, autonomy. The ability to govern yourself and control your own resources. That's what Yanga won. That's what's owed to descendants of enslaved people everywhere. Imagine if every descendant of enslaved people in the US received land resources and autonomy like Yanga's community did. Not 40 acres that were promised and never delivered. Real land, legal land, protected land, with the resources to build on it and the power to defend it. That's not radical. That's historical precedent from 400 years ago. Today, Afro-Mexicans still fight for recognition. Until 2015, they weren't even acknowledged as an ethnic group. The town of Yanga is one of the poorest municipalities in Veracruz state. The descendants of those who defeated Spain are now marginalized, living in poverty in the town their ancestor founded. That's not an accident. That's ongoing suppression. The theft continues. From 1609 to 2025, the theft continues in different forms. If Spain recognized black sovereignty in 1631, we can demand it in 2025. If Yanga negotiated reparations 400 years ago, we can demand them now. This isn't asking. This is demanding what history already proved is owed. Yanga didn't integrate. He didn't assimilate. He didn't beg for a seat at Spain's table. He built a nation. San Lorenzo de los Negros had its own government, its own laws, its own military, its own economy. That's the model. Not begging for inclusion in a system that oppresses you. Building your own system. Today, when black communities talk about economic independence, land ownership, self-governance, that's Yanga's legacy. When Marcus Garvey talked about black nationalism in the 1920s, he was echoing what Yanga did in 1570. When the Black Panthers talked about community control in the 1960s, they were following the Palanque model. This isn't new. This is ancestral knowledge being remembered. Yanga's community produced its own food, built its own infrastructure, traded on its own terms. Today, Black communities in the U.S. spend $1.4 trillion annually. $1.4 trillion. That's more than the GDP of most countries. But only 2% circulates within Black communities. 2%. The other 98% leaves immediately, goes to businesses owned by others, builds wealth for others. Imagine if Black America functioned like Yanga's Palanque: economic self-sufficiency, controlled resources, sovereignty over how wealth is generated and where it flows. That's not fantasy. That's history. It's been done before. It can be done again. Yanga shows you this. You don't wait for oppressors to grant freedom. You take it. You build institutions. You organize. You defend what you build. And when they come to destroy it, like they did in Tulsa, in 1921 like they did in Rosewood, in 1923 like they've done to every successful Black community you rebuild, you resist. You refuse to disappear. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. If this truth hits you, comment Yanga below. If you never learned this in school, comment erased. If you're ready to reclaim this history, comment First Liberator. Hit that like button if you're tired of the sanitized version of Black history they fed you your whole life. Share this video with someone who thinks slavery ended because of white abolitionists. They need to know about Yanga. They need to know about Palmares. They need to know that freedom was taken, not given. Share this with your family, your church, your community. This is our history. African, Latin American, Caribbean, Black American. All of us. This is the Pan-African resistance they erased. Every like pushes this video to more people. Every share breaks the algorithm that tries to bury these stories. They erased Yanga for centuries. Don't let them do it again. You're part of reclaiming this history right now. With a like, with a comment, with a share. Now listen to me carefully. You are not descendants of slaves who waited for white saviors. You are descendants of Gaspar Yanga, who escaped chains, who built a nation, who defeated an empire. You are descendants of warriors who negotiated with kings and viceroys as equals. You are descendants of people who said no to slavery and meant it. With their lives, with weapons, with strategy, with determination that lasted decades. You are not victims. You are survivors of genocide. Your ancestors survived the Middle Passage where millions died. They survived plantation slavery. They survived colonial genocide. And they didn't just survive. They thrived. They built San Lorenzo. They built Palmares. They built Palanques from Mexico to Brazil. That's not victim energy. That's conqueror energy. That's nation builder energy. That's in your blood. That's your inheritance. Yanga was descended from African royalty, the Bran people of Gabon. Your ancestors weren't peasants. They were kings, queens, warriors, builders of empires. They were stolen from African kingdoms and forced into slavery. But they never forgot who they were. That royalty is in your blood. That empire-building capacity is in your DNA. It doesn't matter what your current circumstances look like. What matters is what's coded in your genetics. Resilience, strategy, the refusal to accept chains. If Yanga's descendants had kept that land for 400 years with the same resources and protection white communities received, they'd be wealthy today. Generational wealth, inherited property, accumulated capital. But colonialism didn't end. It evolved. The theft continues. From Yanga's time to now, the pattern never stopped. You're not poor because you're lazy. You're not struggling because you don't work hard. You're struggling because they keep stealing. Every generation. Different methods, same theft. Yanga built a 500-person community in hostile territory for 30 years without support while being hunted. Think about that. No resources, no allies, surrounded by enemies. And he built a functioning society, government, military, economy, religion, culture, all of it from nothing. If your ancestors could build a nation with nothing, what can you build with the resources you have today? With the knowledge you have? With the technology you have? What can you build? 550 Spanish soldiers marched against Yanga's 500 maroons, professional troops with muskets and armor. Yanga's people had machetes and stones. And they won. Not because they had better weapons, because they had better strategy, better determination, better leadership. You don't need superior resources to win. You need superior will, superior intelligence, superior refusal to quit. Yanga didn't beg the viceroy for freedom. He didn't plead. He demanded. He sent his terms: freedom, land, autonomy. Or the war continues. And Spain agreed. The most powerful empire on earth agreed to a black man's terms. That's your legacy. Not begging, demanding, not asking for seats at their table. Building your own table, your own nation, your own systems, your own power. San Lorenzo de los Negros blended Catholicism with African spiritual traditions. Palenque de San Basilio in Colombia still speaks Palenquero, mixing Spanish and Central African languages 400 years later. Maroon communities throughout the Americas preserved African music, dance, religion, food, medicine. Your ancestors didn't forget Africa. They couldn't go back, so they brought Africa with them. They kept it alive in new soil. They passed it to you. That connection is still there, still flowing, still strong. Every struggle Yanga faced, capture, enslavement, escape, war negotiation, nation building, he overcame. Every challenge his community faced, isolation, starvation, military attacks, colonial suppression, they survived. That resilience isn't just history, it's biology. It's inherited. It's coded in your cells. You carry the DNA of people who survived things that should have killed them. That's not weakness. That's supernatural strength. That's divine protection. That's purpose. Why did God bring Yanga through the Middle Passage when millions died? Why did God give him the vision to escape, to build, to lead? Because there was work to do, a mission to complete, a nation to build, a legacy to establish that would inspire people 400 years later. You, right now, watching this. That's why. Yanga's story is Exodus, enslaved people fleeing to freedom, Pharaoh's army pursuing, victory against impossible odds. San Lorenzo de los Negros is the promised land. 40 years of wandering well, 30 years of hiding and building, then freedom, then land, then recognition. The Spanish Empire is Pharaoh, powerful, oppressive, confident they'll win. But God had other plans. God always has other plans for his people. God preserved your ancestors through slavery, through colonialism, through centuries of genocide. Why? Because you have a mission to reveal truth, to demand justice, to reclaim stolen land, to rebuild stolen wealth, to restore stolen dignity, to teach the next generation who they really are. Not what the system says they are, who they really are. Descendants of nation builders, descendants of empire defeaters, descendants of warriors who made the most powerful forces on earth negotiate. You're not here by accident. Your existence is an act of resistance. Your survival is a testimony. Every breath you take is proof they failed to destroy, what God determined to preserve. You are the answer to your ancestors' prayers. They prayed someone would tell the truth. Someone would remember. Someone would reclaim what was stolen. You're the someone. Right now. Today. Yanga was Catholic. He built churches. He prayed. But he also fought. He didn't wait for God to magically free him. He picked up weapons and freed himself. That's faith. Real faith. Praying and fighting. Trusting God and organizing. Believing in heaven and demanding justice on earth. Faith without works is dead. Yanga had both. Faith and works. Prayer and action. Trust and strategy. This is spiritual warfare. The enemy is the lie, the erasure, the theft, the suppression. Your weapon is truth. Like Yanga's weapon was strategy. Like his community's weapon was unity. Speak the truth. Teach your children. Demand what's owed. Build what was stolen. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for approval. Build. Now, they tried to erase Yanga for 250 years. He was forgotten. His name disappeared from history. But in the late 1800s, Mexico named him a national hero. In 1932, they renamed a town after him. God vindicates. It might take generations, but truth always rises. Always. Justice might be slow, but it's certain. Your work today might not see results immediately. You might not live to see the full victory. But keep fighting. God will vindicate. History will remember. Future generations will honor your name like we honor Yanga's today. Subscribe to this channel right now, because Yanga is just one story. There are hundreds more. Queen Nzinga, who fought the Portuguese in Angola for 40 years. The Haitian Revolution that defeated France. The Mau Mau in Kenya who fought the British. The black cowboys who built the American West and were erased from the Westerns. We're exposing all of it. Every buried story. Every erased hero. Every stolen victory. If you don't subscribe, you'll miss them. And this knowledge is too powerful to miss. Tell your children about Gaspar Yanga tonight. Don't wait for the school to teach them they won't. Tell them that in 1609, a black man defeated the Spanish Empire and built the first free black town in the Americas. Tell them their ancestors didn't wait for freedom. They took it. By force. By strategy. By refusing to stay enslaved. Tell them that's who they come from. That's the blood in their veins. This isn't just a video. This is a movement. A movement to reclaim stolen history. To demand stolen wealth. To restore stolen dignity. To refuse the lies they've told for 400 years. Every person watching this is part of that movement. Are you in Prove It? Subscribe, like, comment, share. Right now. Don't wait. Do it now. This isn't revenge. This is restoration. This is truth. This is justice. Yanga fought for his people. Now you fight for yours. With knowledge. With truth. With unshakable determination. With the same refusal to accept oppression that he had. That's your calling. That's your mission. That's your inheritance. Take it. Use it. Pass it on. Bow your heads with me. Father God, we thank you for preserving the story of Gaspar Yanga through centuries of erasure. We thank you for the warriors who came before us, who escaped chains, who built nations, who defeated empires. We pray for Yanga wherever his soul rests. We pray he knows his legacy lives, that the town bearing his name still stands, that his sacrifice was not in vain. We pray for the descendants of San Lorenzo de los Negros, for Afro-Mexicans who still fight for recognition and justice 400 years later. We pray for all maroon communities across the Americas, from Palmares to Palenque to Jamaica to Suriname. We honor their resistance. We claim their legacy. We carry their torch. Lord, give us the courage of Yanga, the strategy, the determination, the refusal to accept chains. When they tell us to wait patiently, remind us Yanga fought. When they tell us to ask honestly, remind us Yanga demanded. When they tell us slavery was so long ago, remind us Yanga built freedom 450 years ago, and it still matters today. It will always matter. Bless those who seek truth in a world of lies. Strengthen those who resist erasure in a system designed to make us forget. Vindicate the memory of our ancestors who died fighting for freedom we now enjoy. And give us the vision to build what Yanga built. Nations, sovereignty, freedom, not granted by oppressors, taken by warriors, defended by the determined, passed to generations who will never forget. In Jesus' name, who said the truth will set you free, and in the name of every ancestor who fought for that freedom with their blood, their sweat, their lives, we pray. Amen. Walk in truth, demand sovereignty, build nations. You are descendants of Gaspar Yanga. Act like it. Until next time, study your history, reclaim your legacy, build your future. You are free. They can't take that from you. Not anymore. Never again.